There is a certain kind of silence that does not feel peaceful. It feels like standing in a room with the door half open, listening for footsteps that never come. You check the phone without meaning to. You set it down. You pick it up again. And somewhere underneath the waiting, underneath the frustration, underneath the part of you that says you are fine, there is a quieter truth. Your body is tired of rescuing what never learned how to meet you halfway. That is the moment many empaths know too well. Not the dramatic ending, not the obvious betrayal, not even the fight. It is the slow erosion that happens when you keep reaching, keep explaining, keep softening yourself for someone who only seems alive when you are carrying the emotional weight for both of you. You become the translator, the comfort, the repair person, the one who notices the shift in tone, the one who fills the gap, the one who makes the room feel safe again. And because you are sensitive, because you can feel what other people do not say, you start to believe that this constant reaching is love. But the deeper truth is more uncomfortable. Sometimes it is not love. Sometimes it is a survival strategy dressed up as devotion. You did not become this way because you are weak. You became this way because somewhere along the line, your nervous system learned that being useful was safer than being fully seen. Being needed felt more secure than being chosen. And if you are honest, there may have been a long time when you did not know the difference. This is where Carl Jung becomes important, because Jung understood something that modern people often miss. We do not only choose relationships with our hearts, we also choose them with our unconscious. We are drawn into patterns that fit old emotional roles, old wounds, old identities. The mind says, I want love, but the unconscious says, find the familiar. And for many empaths, the familiar is not calm reciprocity. The familiar is emotional responsibility. The familiar is the role of rescuer. The familiar is the hope that if you are patient enough, understanding enough, forgiving enough, then the other person will finally become safe. But people do not transform because you suffer beautifully. That sentence can sting, because part of you may have built an entire identity around being the one who can hold it together. You may have been praised for your patience, your kindness, your capacity to understand what others cannot say. And yes, those are real gifts. But a gift becomes a burden when it is used to bypass your own boundary. The rescuer complex is one of the most exhausting patterns a person can live inside. It sounds noble at first. You are the one who sees potential. You are the one who stays calm. You are the one who can love through the mess. You are the one who believes that if you just hold on a little longer, the person in front of you will soften, wake up, remember, return. And sometimes they do soften. Sometimes they do return. Sometimes they do say the right thing at the right moment. And that single moment keeps you invested for months, even years. Because the unconscious does not only respond to what is happening now, it responds to the tiny spark of possibility. It latches onto the glimpse, the almost, the maybe, the version of them that appears for one evening and disappears for 10 days. That is how the loop becomes so hard to leave. You are not only attached to the person, you are attached to the image of who they could be if they finally stopped hiding. And here is where the shadow enters. When someone constantly needs to rescue, there is often a shadow side that they do not want to admit. It may be fear of abandonment, yes, but it may also be fear of your own emptiness. Fear of the stillness that arrives when you are no longer managing someone else's chaos. Fear of discovering that your identity has been built around being indispensable, because if you stop rescuing, you have to feel yourself. Not the role, not the function, yourself. And that can be terrifying at first. The person you have been saving may have learned, consciously or unconsciously, that your empathy is available on demand. They may not even be malicious. They may simply be emotionally underdeveloped, defended, trapped in their own persona, unable to tolerate real intimacy without turning it into distance, control, confusion, or dependency. Jung would say that a persona is the social mask a person wears to survive in the world. Some people build a persona around being strong, unavailable, self-sufficient, unbothered. Others build a persona around being the good one, the understanding one, the one who never asks for too much. When those two personas meet, the dynamic can look like chemistry, but underneath it, there is often a bargain. One person gets to remain guarded, the other gets to remain needed. and both people pay for it. You pay by abandoning yourself in small ways that do not look dramatic from the outside. You say, "It's okay," when it isn't. You answer the message even though your body is screaming no. You explain the same boundary in different words, hoping this time it will land. You become the emotional first responder, and each time you do, a little part of your own center moves farther away. The other person may pay too, though not always in the way you imagine. Because when someone is constantly protected from the consequences of their own emptiness, they never have to develop the muscle of self-confrontation. They never have to meet the loneliness they have been outsourcing. They never have to face the fact that another human being is not a rescue mission. This is why the moment you stop rescuing can feel so strange. At first, it may feel like cruelty. You may hear an internal voice saying, "If I do not step in, everything will fall apart." That voice is not truth. It is the old role speaking. It is the part of you that learned to equate love with emotional labor. And then something else happens. The room gets quieter. At first, the quiet can feel unbearable. You may notice how quickly guilt rises. That guilt is important, because guilt often appears when a boundary is new. Your nervous system interprets the absence of overfunctioning as danger. It says, "You are being selfish. You are being cold. You are abandoning them." But sometimes, what feels like guilt is not a moral signal. It is withdrawal from an old pattern. That is a crucial distinction. Jung did not ask people to become numb. He asked them to become conscious. And consciousness often begins when the old automatic response stops working. When you no longer rush in, the whole dynamic changes. Not because you have performed some trick, not because you have mastered a tactic, but because the emotional economy of the relationship can no longer run on your endless supply. This is where many empaths misunderstand the moment. They think, if I step back, I am punishing them. But that is still the old frame. It keeps the other person at the center. It keeps you trapped in reaction. The deeper move is not punishment, it is return. You are not stepping back to make them feel. You are stepping back so you can feel yourself again. There is a difference between detachment and disappearance. Detachment is not coldness. It is the ending of unconscious fusion. It is the moment you stop confusing your worth with your usefulness. It is the moment you stop treating your compassion like a currency that buys safety. And yet, when you first try this, the body may rebel. You may feel the urge to check, to message, to make sure they are okay, to see whether they noticed your distance, to find out whether your absence has registered. This is the old loop trying to reattach itself, because the unconscious hates a vacuum. It prefers a painful, familiar story to an unfamiliar quiet. But the quiet is where your self begins to speak. In Jungian language, the self is not the ego. It is deeper than the ego. It is the organizing center of the psyche, the part of you that knows how to move toward wholeness even when your conscious mind is confused. The ego says, "I need to fix this now." The self says, "Stop. Listen. Something in this pattern is asking to be seen." And what is asking to be seen is not only the other person's inability to meet you, it is your own pattern of overgiving. That can feel harsh at first, but it is actually liberating. Because as long as you believe the entire problem lives in them, you remain helpless. You remain waiting for their awakening, their apology, their clarity, their change. But when you see your part, not as blame, but as participation, you regain power. Not control, power. Control tries to manage outcomes. Power tells the truth. Maybe the truth is that you have been rescuing because rescue gave you a place in the relationship. Maybe the truth is that your sensitivity has been used to make you responsible for moods that were never yours. Maybe the truth is that you have mistaken emotional intensity for intimacy. Maybe the truth is that your compassion has been so available that no one had to earn access to your inner world. And if that is true, then the work is not to become hard. The work is to become whole. Because wholeness includes boundaries. Wholeness includes the ability to let another person experience the consequences of their own choices. Wholeness includes the right to say, I care about you, but I will not carry what belongs to you. Wholeness includes the right to let silence stay silent. This is where the shadow of the empath becomes important. Many people think the shadow is only anger, jealousy, selfishness, cruelty. But for an empath, the shadow often contains something more subtle: resentment, exhaustion, superiority, hidden control, and the secret hunger to be indispensable. That last one can be painful to admit, but it is worth saying plainly. Sometimes we rescue because being needed makes us feel powerful in a way that vulnerability does not. If they need you, they cannot leave you. If they cannot leave you, you do not have to face the terror of being ordinary, replaceable, imperfect, fully human. That is a hard truth, but it is a freeing one. Because once you see that rescue has been serving your fear as well as their dependency, the whole thing changes. You stop romanticizing your overfunctioning. You stop calling exhaustion devotion. You stop confusing anxiety with love. And then you begin to notice the body. The body often knows before the mind does. It knows when a conversation leaves you depleted. It knows when a message makes your shoulders tighten. It knows when your chest braces before you even open the app. It knows when you are walking on emotional eggshells. It knows when your kindness is being used as a bridge to avoid accountability. Pay attention to that, because the body is where the pattern becomes undeniable. Not in theory, in sensation. There is a certain fatigue that does not come from doing too much work. It comes from becoming the emotional container for someone else's unresolved life. That fatigue feels heavy in the chest, dull behind the eyes, slow in the limbs. You may tell yourself you are just tired, but often you are not tired from living. You are tired from leaking. And the moment you stop leaking, you may feel something that resembles grief. That grief matters too. You are not only letting go of a person, you are letting go of the fantasy that your love could make them into someone else. You are letting go of the role that made you feel useful. You are letting go of the story that said, if you just loved harder, they would finally meet you. This is the point where the deeper truth becomes visible. The relationship was not only about them. It was also a mirror, not a cruel mirror, a revealing one. Carl Jung would say that projection is when we place our inner material onto another person and then respond to them as if they carry our hidden truth. In love, projection is common. We see possibility, safety, danger, worth, rejection, salvation. We see not only the person in front of us, but also the old emotional figures inside us. Sometimes the empath projects goodness onto the other person. Sometimes they project wounded potential. Sometimes they project the hope that this one relationship will finally confirm that their tenderness is not a burden. And when that projection is strong, it becomes easy to overlook the actual behavior in front of you. You keep seeing the version that your unconscious wants to believe in. That does not make you foolish, it makes you human. But the moment you withdraw your rescue, the projection begins to lose its power. And what remains is the real person, with their real limits, their real patterns, their real willingness or unwillingness to meet you. That can be disappointing. It can also be clarifying, because clarity is painful only when we are attached to illusion. When the empath stops rescuing, something often shifts in the other person too. Not always in the dramatic way people fantasize about. Not always with apology, insight, or sudden emotional maturity. Sometimes they become irritated. Sometimes they get colder. Sometimes they test the boundary. Sometimes they seem confused by the fact that the emotional weather is no longer being managed for them. That reaction tells you something important. The dynamic was real. Your role was real. The old arrangement depended on your participation. But do not rush to make their reaction the center of the story. That is another trap. The real story is that your psyche is learning a new language, a language where care does not require self-erasure, a language where empathy does not mean access without limits, a language where guilt is not obeyed automatically, a language where silence is not panic, a language where love is not measured by how much pain you can absorb without complaint. There may be a moment when you realize you no longer want to explain yourself to someone who only listens to keep the pattern alive. That moment can feel almost shocking. The old you would have rushed to soften the tension. The old you would have written the long message, offered the extra chance, made the emotional bridge. But the new part of you pauses, and in that pause, dignity appears. Not loud dignity, quiet dignity, the kind that does not need to announce itself. This is where the persona of the good person can begin to crack. If you have built your identity around being endlessly understanding, then setting a boundary can feel like betrayal. You may fear becoming the bad one, but that fear is often just the old persona defending its image. The good person persona wants to remain admired. It wants to remain the one who never causes discomfort. It wants to remain lovable by being easy to handle. Yet the self is not interested in being easy to handle. The self is interested in truth. And truth sometimes says, this relationship only works when I disappear. Truth sometimes says, my compassion has been mistaken for permission. Truth sometimes says, I have been more loyal to the image of us than to my own well-being. That is a painful sentence, but if it lands with force. If this names something you have never been able to say out loud, write a single sentence for yourself when this video ends. Not to post it for anyone else, just for you. A sentence that tells the truth without apology. Because truth spoken privately can become the first clean boundary. You may also notice that when you stop rescuing, your mind begins to bargain. It says, maybe if I wait a little longer, maybe if I say it differently, maybe if I become less emotional, more calm, more patient, more perfect. But perfection is just rescue wearing a prettier mask. It still asks you to earn what should be mutual. And this is where the shadow work deepens. Because the part of you that keeps rescuing often believes that if you are indispensable, you will never be abandoned. But that belief is false. It only keeps you trapped in relationships where your value is tied to your availability. The more you perform emotional reliability for people who do not reciprocate, the more invisible your actual self becomes. That invisibility hurts. It hurts in a specific way, not only because you are unseen, but because some part of you is complicit in the disappearance. You have been so busy making the situation work that you forgot to ask whether it was working for you. That is why the return is not to them. It is to your own center. Return is a beautiful word here because it suggests you are not becoming someone new from scratch. You are coming back. Back to the part of you that existed before you learned to overfunction. Back to the part of you that could feel without absorbing. Back to the part of you that knew love should not require chronic self-abandonment. And when you begin to return, the world may not applaud immediately. In fact, some people may dislike the change. They may miss the version of you that was always available, always forgiving, always ready to carry what they dropped. But their discomfort is not your emergency. That sentence may need to be repeated in your mind more than once. Their discomfort is not your emergency. You are allowed to let someone sit in the consequences of their own emotional habits. You are allowed to let silence do what silence does. You are allowed to stop filling every pause. You are allowed to let the empty chair remain empty for a while and find out who you are without rushing to occupy it. This is how individuation begins in ordinary life, not with a grand awakening, not with a perfect breakthrough, but with one small refusal to abandon yourself for the sake of keeping the peace. Individuation, in Jung's sense, is the movement toward becoming who you actually are, not who your fears, your roles, or your old attachments have made you into. It is not self-improvement as performance. It is wholeness as truth. And truth often starts with a simple question. What in me has been asking to be rescued, while I was busy rescuing everyone else? Maybe it is your grief. Maybe it is your anger. Maybe it is your need to be cared for without having to earn it. Maybe it is the younger part of you that learned very early that love had to be managed, monitored, and maintained. Maybe it is the part of you that never got to be difficult, because being difficult felt too dangerous. Whatever it is, it deserves attention. Not because it is broken, because it has been ignored. There is a deep kind of healing that begins when you stop asking, how do I save this? And start asking, what is this pattern teaching me about my own unconscious? That question changes everything. It moves you from helplessness to awareness, from reaction to reflection, from emotional labor to self-respect. And self-respect has a tone. It sounds different. It does not over-explain. It does not beg to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding. It does not chase after every withdrawal. It does not collapse at the first sign of distance. Self-respect can sit in the silence without making it a performance. That does not mean you become cold. It means you become clear. Coldness shuts people out to avoid pain. Clarity opens your eyes so you can stop bleeding in the dark. Those are not the same thing. There may come a day when you look at a message and feel no surge to fix, no urge to rescue, no compulsion to reply immediately. You may notice that you can care without entering the old loop. That is not indifference. That is maturity. That is the nervous system learning that not every discomfort requires intervention. And if the person who once depended on your rescue notices the change, let them notice it. You do not need to explain the whole history of your awakening. You do not need to make a speech. Sometimes the most powerful statement is a life that no longer bends itself into an emergency shape for someone else's comfort. This is not about proving a point. It is about ending a pattern. The pattern says, if I keep giving, I will be safe. The new truth says, if I keep giving myself away, I will disappear. That is the real crossroads. And the more honestly you stand there, the less appealing the old role becomes. Because rescue is exhausting. It is a life spent watching other people's storms while your own inner weather goes unspoken. It is waiting by the window with a lit candle, hoping that if you stay warm enough for both of you, something will change. But your candle was never meant to burn down the room. It was meant to light your way home. Home, in this sense, is not a place where everything is perfect. It is the place inside you where your body no longer has to brace for emotional chaos every time the phone vibrates. It is the place where you can feel compassion without surrendering your center. It is the place where your empathy becomes wisdom instead of self-sacrifice. And wisdom is different from rescue. Wisdom knows when to help and when to step back. Wisdom knows that love without boundaries becomes a trap. Wisdom knows that the unconscious will keep offering you the same lesson in different costumes until you finally learn it. The lesson is not care less. The lesson is care without losing yourself. That is a much harder lesson, but it is also a much truer one. So, if you are in the middle of this now, if you feel the pull to go back to the old role, if guilt is trying to drag you back into over-explaining, remember this: the silence is not asking you to panic. It is asking you to notice what happens inside you when you are no longer busy saving someone else. What rises? What aches? What part of you feels naked? What part of you feels relieved? What part of you is quietly grateful that the performance is over? Those are the questions that matter now. Not because they will give you instant answers, but because they will show you where your energy has been going. And when you see that clearly, you can begin to reclaim it. Not all at once, not perfectly, but honestly. There is a kind of strength that appears only after the rescuing ends. It is not harsh. It is not performative. It is the strength of a person who has finally stopped confusing endurance with love. It is the strength of someone who can say, without drama and without apology, I care, but I will not carry what is not mine. That is not abandonment. That is boundary. And boundary, in the language of Jungian psychology, is often where individuation begins to show itself in ordinary life. The psyche grows when it no longer allows one part of you to dominate the whole. The rescuer is only one part. The wounded child is only one part. The good person persona is only one part. The shadow is only one part. None of them should rule your life alone. The goal is not to destroy any part of yourself. The goal is to bring them into a larger order, so that your compassion, your strength, your grief, your anger, and your wisdom can all belong to the same person, you. And maybe that is the deepest return of all. Not to the person who kept you waiting, not to the role that kept you useful, not to the fantasy that your love could heal what another person refuses to face, but to the quiet, steady self who no longer needs to prove that love by disappearing. So let the phone stay silent for a moment. Let the empty chair remain empty. Let the room feel exactly as it feels. And notice that you are still here. That matters more than you know. Because when the empath stops rescuing, something precious can finally happen. The energy that used to leak outward begins to return. The eyes clear. The chest softens. The mind becomes less occupied with managing everyone else. And in that space, your own life begins to reappear. Not a dramatic life, a real one. A life with boundaries. A life with breath. A life with enough dignity to let silence be silence. A life where your kindness no longer requires self-betrayal. And if you need one sentence to carry with you, let it be this: my kindness no longer requires self-betrayal. Say it quietly. Say it until your body recognizes it. Say it until it starts to feel less like an idea and more like a homecoming. Because that is what this is, a return.